The wind moaned like a widowed hymn as Mara stepped off the rusted bus at the edge of the moor. The air smelled of peat and iron, the sky stretched out like a wound stitched with cloud. Before her, perched on the cracked hill like a broken tooth, stood Hemswick Abbey, her inheritance. She stared up at it with uncertainty. No birds flew near. The grass, yellowed and bowed by age, didn't stir in the wind. The silence was wrong, thick and listening. The abbey was a relic, once a cloistered home for women of silence and seclusion. It had been shuttered since 1901 after the death of the last abbess. That woman, according to the solicitor's letter, was Mara's blood. "You are the last heir of Sister Eloan," the letter had said, written in sharp, neat script. "By right and blood the abbey returns to you. But know this, the bell must ring again, once and only once, before the light fails." There was no further explanation. She hadn't planned to come. But in the weeks after the letter arrived, things began to change. Dreams. Whispers. Reflections of a place she'd never seen appearing in puddles, mirror glass, even the blank windows of the train. Her name spoken by mouths that didn't move. Her own voice speaking things she didn't remember saying. So now, with dusk sinking into her bones and the moor pressing in from all sides, she approached the gates. The iron creaked under her hand. No key was needed. The great wooden door opened with a groan like breath after long suffocation. Inside was cold stone, dark wood, and the scent of decay and lavender. The air smelled like dusted bones and candle wax. The nave was empty but not abandoned. Rows of wooden pews stood straight like mourners at a forgotten funeral. At the far end, behind the crumbled altar, rose the bell tower, tall and narrow, spined like a vertebra, and at its top, visible through the stained glass, the bell. Pale metal. No rope. No sound. She walked slowly, her footsteps muffled. Her breath steamed in the air. Above her, glass saints stared from windows dimmed by time. Only one was intact, the pale nun. Veiled in gray, lips sewn shut with red thread, she stood beneath the bell like a statue awaiting sound. Mara paused beneath it. The nun's eyes seemed too knowing. The expression, not peace but warning. She blinked. The nun's head was turned now, slightly, subtly, looking directly at her. A door opened behind the altar with no visible hand. No sound. Only the darkness of the passage behind it, curling down into the bones of the abbey. She hesitated. Something cold pressed at her back, as though the abbey itself leaned forward. Lantern in hand she entered. The descent spiraled downward, deeper than the architecture should have allowed. The stone walls narrowed. The silence grew hungry. Finally she emerged into a small crypt, lit by dying candlelight that she hadn't lit. 7 sarcophagi lined the walls, their surfaces etched with names in Latin and English. All women. All marked Sister. The last, Sister Eloan Gray. Died 1899. Her own name stared back at her from the tomb's base. Mara Eloan Gray. She stepped backward in horror. Her foot struck something, a shallow indentation in the floor beneath Eloan's name. A bell. No larger than her hand. Made of the same pale metal as the tower bell. He picked it up. It was warm. Behind her, a voice whispered. "We do not die. We wait in the hush." Mara spun. No one. But one of the candles had grown taller. Another had begun to bleed wax upward. The bell vibrated in her hand. "Do not ring it. Not yet. Not until the last light fails." That night she camped in the abbey's caretaker chamber, the only room untouched by collapse. She set the bell on the desk beside her bed. It pulsed gently like a heartbeat, slow, deliberate. She dreamt of veiled nuns walking in circles. Of mouths sewn shut. Of a ceremony where a bell tolled once, and the sun refused to rise afterward. And of a girl who looked exactly like her, standing beneath the bell tower and smiling as the door slammed shut. She woke to darkness. Not the absence of light but the presence of something vast pressing in. The bell was gone. But in its place, a lock of red thread. Still damp. Still warm. And a single phrase carved into the wooden table in a hand not her own. "Only silence remembers. And silence will call you by your true name." The bell was gone. In its place, only the red thread, still warm as if just unspooled from flesh. Mara sat frozen, breath shallow, ears straining against the hum of silence pressing in from the stone walls. No footsteps echoed. No wind stirred. Even the moor just beyond the shattered windows lay blanketed in an unnatural stillness. She reached for the carved message on the table again. Only silence remembers. And silence will call you by your true name. She whispered it aloud as if testing the weight of the words. Her voice trembled in the air, and then with dreadful softness it answered her. Not in echo, but in response. A woman's voice rasping through stone and time whispered back. Mara Eloan. A name borrowed, not earned. She stumbled backward, her pulse roaring in her ears. The candle on the desk flickered. Then the flame stretched, not up but sideways, pointing toward the cracked hallway outside the room. Guiding her. He followed. Not by courage but gravity. The abbey was different now. Hallways that had been sealed by rot the day before now lay open. Doors she'd never seen glowed faintly with a dull amber light. Every corridor seemed to tilt subtly inward, like the building itself leaned toward her passage. Or funneled her. She came to a cloistered courtyard at the heart of the abbey. Marble statues, weather-worn and faceless, stood in a circle around a dry fountain. Ivy crawled across their arms, growing inward as though reaching toward something once held in the center. But it was gone. Only a stone pedestal remained. And on it, an inscription half erased. Where the vow is taken, the world forgets the vow. Her hand touched the cold stone. The moment her skin met it, something clicked inside the chapel behind her. The chapel's twin doors swung open without sound. Within, pews dust-choked. A cracked altar. And 7 veiled figures, motionless, seated like obedient congregation members. No breath. No rustle. Then one turned its head, slowly, mechanically, toward her. The veil was stitched to its face. The others followed, necks creaking as if rusted joints awakened. Not to chase. Not to rise. To watch. The silent ones, said a voice beside her, except no one was there. She turned in a panic. But her own reflection had appeared in the broken glass of the chapel's shattered side window. And it was still speaking. They never broke their vows. They were bound to the silence. Bound to the bell. What vow? Mara asked aloud, her voice hollow in the enormous room. Her reflection smiled. Crooked wrong. To keep the world asleep. The statues in the cloister groaned. Stone flaked like dead skin. One raised an arm toward the sky, though no wind stirred. In the distance the tower bell let out a click. A shifting of weight. As though preparing. But it did not ring. Not yet. Mara fled back into the abbey's southern wing. She passed a library half-collapsed, its books rotted to pulp. A sewing room, its needles all pointing toward a dark corner where something pulsed wetly behind the wallpaper. A prayer chamber full of ash and dust. Finally she found a locked door, tall metal old. Not rusted but sealed. Carved into it, a sigil. Circular. Twisting thorns surrounding a weeping face. And beneath it 7 small narrow indentations, like slots for fingers. She reached out, almost in trance, and laid her hand across it. And the metal tasted her. She recoiled. Blood beaded at the tips of her fingers. The sigil glowed faintly. A whisper rippled out from behind the door. 1 vow broken. 6 remain. What are you? She gasped. What am I? But no one answered. That night Mara dared not sleep. Instead she sat by the cracked window of the caretaker's room watching the moor. Things moved out there. Not beasts. Shapes too tall, too slow. Some floated. Others limped, dragging sound behind them. And from the bell tower above she heard footsteps. Not in the stairwell. Inside the bell. Pacing. Waiting. She descended once more into the crypt. The 7th tomb, the one with Eloan's name, was open now. Inside, instead of a body, a mirror. But not a normal one. The glass was black. The reflection was not her own, but hers dressed in nun's robes, lips sewn shut, eyes empty. The reflection raised its hand and pointed upward, toward the tower. And whispered without a mouth. When the bell rings we wake. When it rings twice we feed. The candle she held sputtered and died. And from above, a time. Not from the small bell. Not from a hand. The great bell. It had rung. Once. The sound of the bell was still echoing, long after it should have faded. It wasn't a note, It was a pulse. A tremor carried through stone and marrow, humming in the walls, threading through the air like smoke. Mara pressed her palms against her ears, but it was inside her. Deeper than hearing. The great bell had rung. Not by her hand. And not alone. Somewhere deep in the crypt below, stone began to shift. She ran. Out of the tomb chamber, through corridors that now bent in ways they hadn't before. The abbey had changed, walls breathing inward, stairways growing longer, torches flickering in sconces that had been empty for a century. The silent ones were no longer sitting. She glimpsed them in the chapel as she passed, figures draped in rotting veils, unmoving, yet no longer where she'd last seen them. One stood facing the altar. Another knelt in prayer. A third pressed its sewn mouth to a column, bleeding something black into the stone. None looked at her. But she knew they knew. Back in the caretaker's chamber, the red thread had spread. It had unraveled across the floor, the walls, the ceiling, hundreds of feet of it like veins branching in impossible patterns. And in the center of it all, the bell. But different. Its surface was now cracked, thin fissures running across its pale metal like spiderwebs. Inside the crack something moved. A glimmer like trapped breath or a whisper with shape. She reached out, hand trembling. The moment her fingers touched the bell, she was elsewhere. She stood in the abbey, but it was new. Whole. Bathed in golden morning light. Nuns walked the halls, faces veiled, hands folded. No words spoken. A choir sang, but not with voices, with breath. A long, drawn exhale that formed music somehow more sacred than melody. At the altar stood a girl. Young. Familiar. Alone. But she was not yet the abbess. She was trembling. Before her, a figure cloaked in violet silk and shadow. A man or a thing shaped like one. No face, only a voice. One told to seal them, it said. 2 to summon. 3 to consume. 1 for silence. 1 for sight. 1 for flesh. Eloan nodded. Tears streamed down her face as she picked up the bell and struck it once. The vision shattered. Mara gasped, falling to the ground. The thread around the bell curled toward her like smoke returning to a flame. And far above, the bell rang a second time. This time the sound was different. Not a hum but a wail. Like a scream pressed through rusted metal, filled with grief and hunger. The abbey answered. Walls cracked. The stone cried. Something beneath the foundations stirred. And now the silent ones moved. Not as ghosts. Not as spirits. But as flesh too long forgotten how to be. Their veils dragged behind them as they walked. Not toward her but upward. Toward the tower. Mara knew, if the bell rang a third time something would wake. And it would not go back to sleep. She fled into the library again, now half sunken into the earth. There, in a half-buried cabinet behind broken shelves, she found Eloan's journal. Its cover was bound in dried skin. The pages written in blood turned brown. She turned to the final entry. The first toll seals the silence. It binds what should not move. The second is a warning. The third is death. We made the vow with thread and tongue. To keep the mouth of the earth closed. I was the last to take the thread. I stitched the veil myself. I rang the bell once and only once. They begged me never to return. But now she comes. My blood. My voice. She bears the name. She must not toll it again. Do not let her find the tower's mouth. But Mara had already seen it. In the dream. Behind the altar. A mouth beneath the bell. Not metaphor, not symbol. A mouth. The great bell tolled once more. Almost. A shudder. A gasp. Then silence. It had been stopped. She ran. Upward. Past the veiled nuns. Past the chapel now flooded in black water. Through doors that opened like eyelids she climbed the spiraling stair of the bell tower. And there beneath the great bell stood a woman. Veiled. Moving. Alone. No decay. No age. As if time had paused for her or forgotten her name. He held the rope that should not exist. Her fingers, bloody, gripped it tightly. Mara approached, heart splintering in her chest. Eloan, she whispered. The figure turned. Her face was Mara's. Older. Stitched. She opened her arms and said, though no mouth moved. One of us must take the veil. One must become the silence again. And then she reached out. And placed the veil in Mara's hand. The veil trembled in Mara's hands. It was light, lighter than cloth had any right to be. but warm as though recently worn. Threads of red shimmered faintly in its weave, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Her reflection in the tower's broken window, Eloan's face now, watched her silently, lips stitched in a crimson smile. Below, the abbey was stirring. The ground itself was breathing. The second toll had opened something. One more would awaken it. She stepped toward the great bell where Eloan stood without moving. Or maybe it wasn't Eloan anymore. Maybe it never had been. The woman's eyes, visible through the veil, held time itself. Memory. Grief. I don't understand, Mara whispered. The wind answered. You were born from the silence. From the vow that cracked but never broke. You are the last thread. The bell creaked on its ancient rope. And beneath them the mouth waited. From the tower Mara saw the truth. The courtyard's dry fountain was gone. In its place, a hole. Enormous. Circular. Breathing. Stone crumbled inward, and from its edge rose 7 figures. The silent ones, now unmasked. Beneath each veil had been no face. Only a mirror. Reflecting nothing. Not absence, erasure. They stood in a ring around the mouth of the earth, arms raised. Chanting not with voices but intent. A soundless rite. Waiting for the bell to toll once more. Eloan, Mara said, stepping forward. Why did you call me here? The woman lifted a hand and pointed downward, at the mouth. Because I could not hold the silence alone. What happens if I ring it? Mara asked, voice shaking. The veiled woman gave no answer. But something beneath the abbey did. It whispered her name. Not Mara. Not Eloan. A third name, one not spoken by any living tongue. She felt it inside her bones. Felt herself unraveling. Her memories warping. The face in the mirror shifting again. She saw a child left at the abbey gates. A candle-lit vow. A veil pressed over her eyes by a weeping nun. And a name carved into her soul. Not Mara, not Eloan, but Bellwether. The last. The watcher of the silence. She had never left the abbey. She had been kept. The bell shook violently. It hungered now. Not for sound but for purpose. For a final voice to carry through the stones and soil and sky. To call what slumbered. Mara looked at the veil. Then at the rope. Then at Eloan, her other self, her beginning and her end. I won't do it. Eloan smiled. Not with joy but with peace. She nodded. And stepped forward. Then suddenly, collapsed. Her body crumbled like ash. The veil slipped from Mara's hands and floated to the floor. But before it touched stone, it melted into thread. And the red thread coiled up the bell rope like a serpent, fusing with the metal. It was no longer a question. Mara was the bell now. Below, the silent ones turned their faceless heads upward. They waited. The abbey itself seemed to hold its breath. The mouth widened. From it rose a sound. Not a growl. Not a scream. A memory. Of voices. Hundreds. Thousands. All those who had ever been silenced. They spoke now all at once. Let it ring. Mara stepped back. And instead of pulling the rope she did something else. She opened her mouth. And she sang. Not words. Just a single pure note. The bell shook. It did not ring. But it listened. The silent ones froze. The mouth below hesitated. And for one terrible moment all the world teetered. Would it fall? Would it wake? Would she? But her song grew louder. And the veil within the bell, now fused to it, began to unravel again. Thread by thread. And in that unraveling, the silence closed. Not in suppression but in choice. The bell remained unrung. The mouth, denied its third toll, withered inward. Collapsed. The silent ones folded like paper, falling into the earth, one by one. The abbey let out a sigh. And stillness. Dawn came. Mara stood alone in the tower. No bell. No veil. No reflection. Just herself. But this time she knew her name. Not the one given. The one earned. Silence Keeper. She descended the tower slowly. The abbey, now quiet, no longer pulsed with secrets. The walls were just walls. The crypt only stone. The altar only wood. And beneath it all, the great mouth was gone. Only a cracked fountain remained, dry and clean. Outside, the moor shimmered with dew. Sunlight touched the stones for the first time in decades. Birds returned. And far above, in the empty belfry, only wind stirred.